said last Sunday that there are three reasons that we are focusing on the book of James. First of all, it's one of the earliest pieces of Christian literature we have in the Bible. Secondly, it evidently was written by James, the brother of Jesus. But thirdly, more importantly, it is the premier book in the Bible when it comes to practical Christian living. The book of James is the premier book in the Bible when it comes to insights for practical Christian living. And so what I'm doing on each of these three Sundays is taking passages from the book of James and gleaning from those passages truths for your life and truths for mine. So let me share today some additional insights. First of all, live with unwavering gratitude. Live with unwavering gratitude. James says this: every good gift, every perfect gift comes from God. Now, there's not a one of us in this sanctuary this morning who has a perfect life. Every one of us, as I said last Sunday, faces adversity in life. There are difficulties in your life. There are difficulties in my life. There are challenging times in your life. There are challenging times in my life. There is not a one of us who has a life that is without difficulty and without challenge. But there's also not a one of us who is without blessing in our life. There's not a one of us, when we stop and think about it and reflect on it, who isn't truly blessed in our lives. James said, every good and perfect gift in your life and in mine is a blessing from God. 75 years ago, this last July the 4th, a sobering event happened in New York City, Yankee Stadium. On that occasion, as you probably know, Lou Gehrig retired. He had played 2,330 straight games. He was known as the Iron Man. He had won the Most Valuable Player twice. He had won the Triple Crown, which is a most remarkable event in baseball. And yet, some months before July the 4th, 1939, he had begun to experience some weakness in his muscles, some numbness. He noticed that he got tired a lot easier. And he tried to play, but it showed in his play that something was wrong. So Lou Gehrig checked himself into Mayo Clinic, and as you so well know, was diagnosed with ALS, now called Lou Gehrig's disease. And on July the 4th, 1939, at Yankee Stadium, he retired. After 17 straight years as the first baseman of the New York Yankees. And if you've not gone onto the web and looked at his speech on that occasion, you ought to do so. But I'm going to share a part of it with you. Fans, for the past 2 weeks, you've been reading about the bad break I got. Yet today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. I've been in ballparks for 17 years, and I've never received anything but kindness and encouragement from you fans. Look at these grand men. Which of you wouldn't consider it the highlight of his career just to associate with him for one single day? When the New York Giants, a team you would give your right arm to beat and vice versa, sends you a gift, that's something. When everybody down to the groundskeepers and those boys in white coats remember you with trophies, that's something. When you have a wonderful mother-in-law who takes sides with you and squabbles with her own daughter, that's something. That is something. When you have a father and a mother who work all their lives so you can have an education and build your body, it's a blessing. When you have a wife who has been a tower of strength and shown more courage than you dreamed existed, that's the finest I know. So I close in saying that I may have had a tough break, but I have an awful lot to live for. James said, our lives are full of good and perfect gifts. We are a blessed people no matter what the difficulties and the challenges we face. Lou Gehrig said, I may have had a tough break, but I have an awful lot to live for. So do you. So do I. We ought then to live every day with a spirit of gratitude. Secondly, James says, watch your anger. He writes, know this, my dear brothers and sisters, everyone should be slow to grow angry. Now, we all get angry. There is no such thing as a human being who doesn't, at one time or another, in the right circumstances especially, get angry. And I think you know even Jesus got angry. One of the most revealing verses in the Bible is Mark 3:5, where Mark writes that Jesus, in an encounter with the religious authorities, turned and looked at them with anger. Mark 3:5. Jesus is in a spat with the religious authorities, and Mark says, and he turned and looked at them with anger. And the Greek word there for anger is intense anger. So literally speaking, Mark 3:5 says, Jesus turned and looked at them with intense anger. We all get angry. But there are 4 questions that we need to ask ourselves whenever we get angry. First of all, what is the level of our anger? Is our anger the kind that rises quickly when we're upset about something and then just as quickly subsides? Or is our tendency to carry a temper, to let our anger continue? And rather than have it subside, have it continue? What is the level of our anger? Secondly, are you and I willing, with God's help, to work on our anger? Once we acknowledge that there is anger, and especially if there is ongoing anger, are you and I willing, with God's help, to work on that anger? Thirdly, are we willing to immerse ourselves in prayer so it doesn't become resentful or unhealthy anger? I mean, anger can easily become, if we're not careful, resentful anger. Let the issue boil long enough. Let the hurt go deep enough. Let that person still be a part of my life. And natural, normal anger can, if we're not careful, become resentful anger, which is never right. And finally, are we mature enough to apologize when our anger does get out of hand? One of my favorite anecdotal stories, and it is truly anecdotal, is the story of the preacher who was preaching on forgiveness. And during the sermon, he asked his congregation, how many of you are willing to forgive the worst enemy in your life? If you're willing to forgive the worst enemy in your life, raise your hand. Well, about a third of the congregation raised their hand. And then he said, now look, Jesus said we're supposed to forgive those who wrong us. So I'm going to ask again, how many here today are willing to forgive your worst enemy? At that point, about 3/4 of the congregation raised their hand. So he pressed again. Jesus said we're to forgive those who wrong us. I'm going to ask one more time, how many of you are willing to forgive your worst enemy? And at that point, everybody in the congregation, but one elderly woman who was sitting on the front row, raised their hand. Well, he couldn't help but notice that, so he said to her, he said, Mrs. Jones, don't you have any enemies? And she said, no, I don't. He said, well, how old are you, Mrs. Jones? She said, I'm 93 years old. He said, you're 93 years old and you don't have a single enemy? She said, that's right. He said, Mrs. Jones, that's remarkable. Would you come down front and tell this congregation why it is and how it is that you can live for 93 years and not have an enemy with whom you are extremely angry? So Mrs. Jones made her way from the front pew to the chancel area. The preacher asked her to turn around and face the congregation and tell the congregation how it was that she could live 93 years without having a single enemy. So Miss Jones came down, turned around, faced the congregation, and simply said, I outlived the old biddies. Hey, look, it's not enough to try to outlive the anger. Let time settle the issue. Where anger is real, where anger reveals itself, we need, with God's help, says James, to address it. Third insight is this: let your actions reveal your faith. James writes, you must be doers of the word and not only hearers. What good is it if people say they have faith but do nothing to show it? Are you spiritually slow? You need to be shown that faith without actions has no value at all. We would put it in the modern vernacular, we must walk the walk and not just talk the talk. Let me tell you 3 ramifications when you and I don't walk the walk as we talk the talk. First of all, it reveals our spiritual immaturity. If I think that my relationship to Jesus is all about faith, and I'm not working on the way I walk in faithfulness to Him, that's an immature faith. And if you think that it's all about faith in Jesus and commitment to Jesus as a part of a profession of faith, and you're not working on how you walk the walk, that's an immature faith. Secondly, we fail to grasp that God expects us to be obedient. He loves us. His grace is extended toward us. He will forgive us. But God does not relinquish the expectation that you and I, as best we can with His help, be obedient. Well, let me tell you the most serious ramification when you and I don't walk the walk. We truly hurt the witness of the Christian faith. And you know that. I was reading not long ago a biography of the spiritual journey of Mahatma Gandhi. And I would think everyone in this sanctuary would look with great admiration on that wonderful man, Mahatma Gandhi, the Hindu leader. And in this biography, he talks about Gandhi going to school in London. He attended the university in London. And while he was there, he began a search to find out if Christianity was the one true religion. So he's Hindu. He comes as a young man to London to study, and while there, seeks to find out if Christianity is the one true religion. And he continues that journey for some time. After he graduates from the university, writes this biographer, he went to his first job in East Africa. And while he was there, he lived with a Christian family. And keep in mind, all this while, Gandhi is searching to discover if Christianity is the one true religion. And this biographer writes this: when he accepted employment in East Africa and lived with a family who were members of an evangelical Christian church, he believed this would be his greatest source of evidence for the Christian faith. Gandhi lived with his family for 7 months. But after seeing their casual attitudes toward God, hearing them complain about making sacrifices for Christ, and becoming acutely aware of their religious apathy, he became disillusioned. No, he concluded, Christianity is not the one true supernatural religion I had hoped to find. A good religion, but one more of the many religions in the world. All because he spent 7 months with a Christian family. E. Stanley Jones was his dearest friend. E. Stanley Jones was a Methodist missionary to India. And E. Stanley Jones writes about the occasion that he asked Gandhi specifically, why do you not commit your life to Jesus? Because he knew how deeply Gandhi admired Jesus. And Gandhi's response to E. Stanley Jones is riveting to you and it's riveting to me. He said, oh, I don't reject your Jesus. I love your Christ. It's just that so many of you Christians are so unlike him. Now, I will never be a perfect Christian. You will never be a perfect Christian. But if we believe for one moment that the world isn't looking in on how we live our faith and how we walk the walk, we are truly one naive bunch of folks. Not only is it spiritual immaturity, the world is watching. Fourthly, James would say, learn to control your tongue. He writes, if those who claim devotion to God don't control what they say, they mislead themselves. Their devotion is worthless. And then later in chapter 3, he literally goes on to say that he thinks the tongue is a great evil, meaning our words, our language, our speech, what we say. He's so pessimistic about language and the tongue that he literally lights, it's like a wildfire. It's a spark that starts and then becomes a wildfire of evil. And it's almost as if James lived in our time and was experiencing the extreme incivility that you and I see in so many social, political, and religious circles. It's like he lives here and he sees all the judgmentalism among ethnic and religious and cultural groups. It's like he lives here and he sees the unrelenting gossip that pervades our culture. It's like he lives here and sees the expansion of profanity in our culture and entertainment. It's like he lives here and sees all the unapologetic indictment of people's lifestyles and perspectives if they're different than our own. When he writes about the tongue being an evil, it's almost as if James lives in the 21st century. With God's help, we need to understand the power of our words. One Christian thinker says this: words have the power to build up or tear down. They have the power to spread truth or spread falsehood. They have the power to heal emotional wounds or create emotional wounds. They have the power to help a person feel good about oneself or feel terrible about oneself. They have the power to inspire persons to acts of kindness or motivate persons to acts of hatred. What about your words? What about my words? And finally, James says we need to live with deep empathy and compassion. He writes, true devotion, faithful religion, the kind that is pure and faultless before God the Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their difficulties. You know as well as I do that you could have your theology absolutely right. You could be a biblical scholar. You could have doctrine down pat. You could be the most disciplined church member in the world. And yet, if when, as Lisa said in her children's time, you and I walk outside these doors, and the people who work with us, and live with us, and know us, and experience us, don't find in us some empathy and compassion, they don't see Jesus in us. But when all is said and done, and you know this as well as I do, it's not about theology and doctrine and getting everything right by biblical understanding. It's about empathy and compassion to the hurting of the world. Nothing is a greater witness for the church than that. Many of you know that I love Shel Silverstein. And in one of my recent ponderings, one of my recent weekday devotionals, I quoted his piece, The Little Boy and the Old Man. Said the little boy, sometimes I drop my spoon. Said the old man, I do that too. The little boy whispered, I wet my pants. I do that too, laughed the little old man. Said the little boy, I often cry. The old man nodded, so do I. But worst of all, said the boy, it seems grown-ups don't pay attention to me. And he felt the warmth of a wrinkled old hand. I know what you mean, said the little old man. What cutting words. Nobody pays attention to me. The hurting, the needful, those on the fringe of hopelessness in their lives just want somebody with empathy and compassion to pay attention to them. James says that should be us. So today, what do we learn from James? Live with unwavering gratitude. Watch our anger. Learn to control the tongue. Let our actions reveal our faith. Walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And live with deep empathy and compassion. Thanks be to God.